With its authoritarian government, covering China from inside China is tricky for the press. But now the Wall Street Journal has made it even trickier, getting 3 of its reporters thrown out of the country over a provocative headline by an opinion columnist, which in turn is driving a wedge between the journal's opinion section and its newsroom. Adam Riley has more.
For the press and the public, the Wall Street Journal's Walter Russell Mead is a go-to voice on foreign policy, including relations between the U.S. and China, which he says are heading toward a new Cold War.
They see real hostility from the West toward their form of government.
And also real hostility from Walter Russell Mead. As the Chinese government scrambled to contain the coronavirus, the Journal ran a Mead column titled "China is the Real Sick Man of Asia." It criticized the Chinese response and predicted China's economy would take a hit. 2 weeks later, as the cameras rolled, 3 Wall Street Journal reporters were expelled from the country.
A dramatic retaliation against journalists in China.
They have 5 days now to leave the country.
Forget the trade war. This is the media war.
China says it acted because the headline on Mead's piece was racist, conjuring up decades of domination by Western powers. It also says in this case, the divide between the journal's news and opinion operations doesn't really matter.
Who is responsible for this then? We will apologize.
So far, not the Journal's editorial page, which claims China is using the expulsions to deflect from its coronavirus woes. But in a letter sent to management, more than 50 members of the Journal's newsroom staff urged the paper to change the headline and apologize, saying someone should have known that it would cause widespread offense. If they didn't, they made a bad mistake.
Well, you're pounding the table. I happen to agree with you. I can, call Ripley's. I never thought in a million years I would ever agree with China about anything. But to me, this is just, it was unnecessarily provocative and conjuring up decades-old racist tropes.
Oh, it is not a racist trope. Sick man of Asia is a term that dates back to the 1890s, and it was used by Chinese scholars to describe the condition of the country's political leadership at that time. It does not have a racist connotation. I'd like to know who these 53 reporters and editors are at the Journal who were born without spines. This is ridiculous. If an op-ed page of a newspaper can't write a pointed piece with a pointed headline without groveling and apologizing to a totalitarian regime afterward, we're in bigger trouble than we thought.
Well, I thought the piece was fine, but the headline was really problematic, and Mead himself has distanced himself from the headline, saying, I did not write the headline. We happen to have a lot of Chinese graduate students at Northeastern, and it was an education to me. They were highly offended by this, and they saw the headline as deeply racist. One of my students wrote a column about it. It was an education to me, and this, yes, it does have historical roots, but the historical roots are in the humiliation that China suffered for many decades before getting back on its feet.
Yeah, that was my take on it, too, that the headline was a problem, not the piece. So I don't think they would lose a spine, John, to use your words, if they said, we stand by our piece, but, the person who writes the piece never does a headline. That's something that we have to accept as people who should be paying attention to all of the stuff that might trigger. We have all kinds of conversations here all the time about bad headlines, and they have gotten many people in trouble over issues like this of sensitivity. This is a particularly sensitive issue because we're talking about a virus, talking about financial markets, we're talking about all this other stuff, so they should have been extra careful with it. And it might be a situation, as Dan was saying, that they had not heard of before. So it does not harm them to say, okay, we've been educated about this. We stand by the piece, however. And if we were rewriting the headline, here's what we say in conjunction with the piece, because we stand by it.
I agree. And I think there's nothing that I can argue with the piece itself, but clearly the headline is a little bit problematic. Again, though, it accomplished what these headlines are typically supposed to do, right? You do something that's edgy, that gets a lot of attention in order to draw attention to the piece itself. It did this within the context of what we now understand about out this phrase, did it go too far? I think yes, but if I had been the editor on something like this, I'm not sure I would have understood that. In fact, I didn't understand until we started researching this, that it did have more of an offensive connotation. And so perhaps the editors were in the same position, not knowing.
John, I want you to take another bite at the apple, though.
I'm eager to be educated and see this alleged research that documents the racist connotation of this. That's not what my reading says at all. And, you know, if it's being retroactively labeled as racist, why cave in? I don't get it.
One thing I want to point out, by the way, is that there's a lot of tit-for-tat going on here.
Yes.
Those 3 Wall Street Journal reporters were banned from the country.
Oh, yeah.
The day after the U.S. government labeled 5 Chinese news organizations as essentially government propaganda fronts, which they probably are.
Yeah,
Yeah, but they picked on the Wall Street Journal as opposed to
Yes.
the New York Times
Yes.
or anybody who's been doing all that investigative work about the Uyghurs, for instance.